Night wrapped the Cole estate in silver frost. Security lights blinked along the iron fence like watchful eyes. Inside the marble mansion, motion sensors kept silent vigil over rows of manicured hedges and a garden that looked more like a museum than soil. But in one dark corner of the hedge, something moved. An 11-year-old girl crawled through the gap, knees scraping the frozen ground. Her name was Lena. She was small, thin, and shivering, clutching her stomach as if trying to quiet the growl echoing inside. The moonlight caught the edges of her torn sweater. She paused, scanning the garden. Towers of tomatoes glistened with dew, red as rubies. Beyond them stood neat rows of lettuce and herbs, luxury crops grown for one man's breakfast table. Lena bit her lip. Just a few, she whispered to herself. Just enough for Mom. Her hands trembled as she reached for a tomato, twisting it gently from its stem. The sweet scent hit her nose and nearly made her cry. She slipped it into the pocket of her jacket, then reached for another. Suddenly, click. A red dot blinked on the security camera overhead. Inside the mansion, a monitor flashed, motion detected, Sector 4. A guard straightened. Sir, we've got movement in the garden. Outside, sprinklers hissed to life, spraying arcs of icy water. Lena gasped and ducked. The sound was deafening. Floodlights exploded to white, blinding her. A voice barked through a speaker, "Step away from the property." She froze. Her tiny hands lifted instinctively, one still holding a half-eaten tomato. From the main path came the heavy thud of boots and the echo of barking dogs. Two guards in black uniforms charged toward her. "Don't move," one shouted. I'm sorry," she stammered, backing up until her feet hit the flower bed's edge. "Please, I'll put it back." They didn't listen. One seized her arm, rough fingers biting into her sleeve. The tomato dropped to the ground, bursting in a splash of red against the white snow. Inside the mansion, Adrian Cole was pacing his office, Bluetooth earpiece glowing. He was mid-argument with a board member when the call from security broke through. "Sir, we caught someone in the garden. Looks like a kid." Adrian frowned. "A what?" "A little girl, maybe 10 or 11. He sighed, irritation slicing through fatigue. "It's midnight, Russell. Call the police." He ended the call before the guard could answer. Another nuisance. Another trespasser. Ever since his company made headlines for its eco-garden initiative, activists and thieves had been slipping through the gates, claiming moral rights to his produce. He straightened his cuffs, grabbed his coat, and stepped out into the cold. The scene that met him froze him in place, a child drenched in sprinkler water, hair plastered to her face, clutching at the guard's sleeve. The dogs snarled at her feet. Adrian's voice was sharp. "What on earth?" "She was stealing, sir," the guard said quickly. "Caught her with produce in her pockets." Adrian's gaze fell to the scattered tomatoes on the snow. "At midnight?" The girl's voice was barely a whisper. "Please. I was hungry." "Hungry," he repeated, as if the word belonged to another language. "I just wanted to take some for my mom. She's sick." The guard scoffed. "They all have stories, sir." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Empty her pockets." The guard reached in and pulled out 3 tomatoes, a bruised cucumber, and a single wilted leaf of lettuce. That was all. "Call the police," Adrian said coldly. Lena gasped. "No. Please. I'll never come back, I promise." He turned away. Trespassing is trespassing. She knew what she was doing. The guard moved to drag her toward the gate. She stumbled, crying out. "Sir. It's for my mom. She can't eat anything else." Something in her voice, raw, desperate, made Adrian hesitate. For half a second, he glanced back. The floodlight cut across her face. Eyes wide, cheeks hollow, a small silver bracelet hanging from her wrist engraved with the letters GM. It stirred something deep, a flicker of déjà vu. But pride hardened faster. "Let her learn consequences," he said quietly. The guard nodded and reached for his radio. Lena twisted free, dropping to her knees in the mud. "Please don't call them. They'll take my mom away." Her voice cracked on the word mom. The dogs barked louder, and one lunged forward until the leash snapped tight. The guard yanked it back, cursing. Adrian stepped back instinctively, brushing dirt from his trousers as if her presence might stain him. "Enough," he snapped. "Get her off my property." Tears blurred Lena's vision. "I didn't mean to steal," she whispered. "I just didn't want her to starve." Adrian turned toward the mansion, the lights glinting off his cufflinks like shards of ice. Behind him, the girl's small voice carried through the cold air, breaking like glass. "Please, she needs me." He paused for the briefest heartbeat, his hand hovering on the doorknob. The guard's voice cut in, steady and businesslike. "Police are on the way, sir." Adrian nodded once and disappeared inside. Minutes later, the garden was silent again, except for the drip of water and the quiet sobs of a child kneeling beside crushed vegetables. She pressed her palms together and whispered to the night. "Please let her live till morning." Far above, a camera light blinked, recording everything: the child, the wrecked garden, the injustice that would soon become a headline. In a city built on walls and wealth, mercy was rarer than gold. And that night, a hungry girl met the one man whose heart was colder than the frost beneath her feet. The shot lingers on the burst tomato in the snow, red bleeding into white like guilt spreading into purity. He had no idea that by morning, that little thief would change his entire life. Morning crept over the city like a shy apology. The frost on the pavement began to melt, leaving the streets wet and glistening. Somewhere in that maze of alleyways, Lena stirred awake beneath a threadbare blanket. The night's chill still clung to her bones. She sat up slowly, eyes darting toward the rusted doorway beside her. Behind it, a soft cough answered. "Mom," she whispered. A frail voice came from the shadows. "I'm here, baby." Her mother lay on a mattress made of flattened cardboard, skin pale, lips dry. A half-empty bottle of cough syrup sat nearby, and beside it, a plastic bowl with yesterday's rainwater. Lena knelt beside her. "You need to eat." Her mother smiled faintly. "Did you get some rest?" "I tried," Lena said. "I almost found food last night, but," she stopped herself. The image of guards, floodlights, and barking dogs flashed behind her eyes. Her mother reached up, brushing a curl from Lena's forehead. "Don't take risks, my love." Lena swallowed hard. "I'll be careful." The older woman coughed again, a deep rattle that shook her thin shoulders. Then, softly, "Remember what I told you. Even when the world forgets kindness, you keep it." Lena nodded. "Always." A few streets away, the world looked completely different. At the highest point of the city, the coal estate gleamed in the winter sunlight. Inside, everything hummed with quiet precision. Adrian Cole, dressed in a charcoal suit, sat at a glass table eating breakfast prepared by people who never spoke louder than whispers. News screens along the wall scrolled with stock updates and headlines about his company's green innovation. His assistant, Clara, appeared in the doorway. "Sir, the security team handled the situation last night. The girl's gone." Adrian barely looked up. "Gone where?" "They said she ran off before the police arrived." He nodded once, cutting into his omelet. "Good. Make sure they reinforce the garden fence." Clara hesitated. "She was a child, sir." He didn't answer. Instead, he wiped his mouth, stood, and walked toward the window overlooking his perfect rows of vegetables. The place where footprints in the soil had already been raked away. Beneath the glass, the garden shone spotless again, no sign of the small hands that had touched it. He told himself that was how it should be. Back in the narrow alley, Lena filled an old tin can with water from a dripping pipe and set it over a small flame made from scraps of cardboard. She tore half a piece of bread, hard and stale, and soaked it in the warm water to soften it. "Here, Mom," she whispered. "It's not much." Her mother smiled weakly. "It's enough." Lena watched her eat, each bite smaller than the last. "Did you ever work for a man named Cole?" she asked suddenly. Her mother looked up, startled. "Why do you ask?" "I saw his name on a sign by a big house. I thought maybe," she trailed off. A shadow crossed the older woman's face. "Yes. A long time ago. Before everything went wrong." "What happened?" Her mother shook her head slowly. "Grown-up problems, sweetheart. You don't need to worry about them." But Lena noticed the sadness that lingered in her mother's eyes, the kind that comes from something unfair left unspoken. Adrian sat in a sleek conference room surrounded by executives. Charts glowed on screens, voices droned about quarterly growth. He should have been pleased, profits were rising, shareholders smiling. But his mind kept drifting to the image of that girl's face. The look of terror. The small silver bracelet on her wrist. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Let's move the charity gala to next week," he muttered suddenly. The executives blinked. "Excuse me, sir. I said move it. I'm not in the mood for applause." They exchanged nervous glances but obeyed. When the meeting ended, Adrian lingered behind, staring at his reflection in the black screen. For the first time, he noticed how tired he looked. The lines near his eyes, the faint gray at his temples. Wealth had given him control over everything, except the emptiness that never went away. Meanwhile, Lena stood outside a bakery, the smell of bread making her dizzy. Through the window she watched customers laughing, trading coins for pastries larger than her hands. She reached into her pocket, only lint. A man behind the counter noticed her and frowned. "Hey, no loitering." She stepped back quickly, muttering an apology. Her stomach growled louder. She turned away, her eyes catching on a small poster taped to a lamppost, "Help Wanted, Garden Assistant, Cole Estate." Her heart thumped. She traced the printed address with her finger. "Maybe if I worked there." Then she looked down at her muddy shoes and torn sweater. Still, hope flickered like a candle against the wind. That evening, clouds rolled over the city again. Lena returned to the alley carrying a single apple she'd managed to earn by sweeping outside a cafe. Her mother was asleep, breathing shallowly. Lena placed the apple beside her, then sat back and whispered, "Tomorrow will be better." Across town, Adrian sat in his library with a glass of untouched wine, the same security footage playing on repeat, frame by frame. He paused on one still, the girl's face turned toward the light, fear in her eyes. He zoomed in. On her wrist, the bracelet glimmered again. 2 small letters engraved, G.M. He frowned. Grace Morgan, he murmured, the name of someone he hadn't thought about in years. For the first time in a long while, the billionaire's certainty began to crack. The poor seek mercy to survive, the rich avoid guilt to sleep. But the universe has a strange way of making both meet halfway. Snow began to fall again, thin flakes dancing between city lights, one side of town shining with glass towers, the other drowning in shadows. 2 worlds. 1 storm. And by tomorrow, they'd collide again. He thought he'd left his past behind. But sometimes the past doesn't ask permission, it simply knocks. The next morning broke with a gray sky and restless wind. Lena walked through the streets clutching the crumpled, "Help Wanted" poster she'd torn from the lamppost. Her hands were numb, her shoes soaked, but determination burned behind her tired eyes. She had replayed the night 100 times, the floodlights, the shouting, the billionaire's cold face. Every time she reached the end of that memory, she whispered the same words. "I'll make it right." Her mother's cough echoed faintly in her mind. If she could earn even a day's pay, it would buy medicine, maybe enough food for the week. And so, she went back to the one place she swore she'd never see again, the coal estate. The gates loomed tall, silver spears glinting under the morning frost. Lena hesitated outside, heart hammering. She smoothed her hair, brushed dirt from her sleeves, and pressed the intercom button. A static crackle, then a voice, "State your business." I came about the garden job," she said, trying to sound brave. "The sign said you're hiring." There was a pause, then the gate buzzed. "Wait by the fountain." Lena stepped through the opening and into a world that didn't seem to belong to her, sculpted hedges, marble paths, a fountain taller than her mother's old apartment building. She hugged her elbows, whispering, "Don't be scared. Just tell the truth." Inside the mansion, Adrian Cole was in the middle of a tense call when the head of security entered. "Sir, there's someone here asking about the garden position." "Handle it," Adrian said distractedly. "She's the same girl from last night." The pen in his hand froze mid-air. "The thief?" "Yes, sir." He leaned back in his chair. "She came back." The guard nodded. "Says she's here for a job." Adrian stared at the desk for a long moment. Then, quietly, "Bring her in." Lena stood at the edge of the grand hall, shifting her weight nervously. The floor gleamed like water, she could see her own reflection. Small, nervous, and out of place. When Adrian entered, the air seemed to tighten. He looked taller in daylight, his expression unreadable. "So," he said, crossing his arms, "you thought breaking in was a good job application?" Lena swallowed hard. "I didn't know what else to do. I saw the poster and thought maybe." He cut her off. "You thought I'd just forget last night?" She looked down. "No, sir. I thought you might let me work to pay it back." For a brief moment, Adrian saw something in her face, the same quiet determination that used to live in someone else's eyes. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lena." "And your mother's name?" "Grace Morgan." The sound of it hit him like a struck bell. His gaze sharpened. "Grace Morgan?" She nodded. "She used to work for people like you. Maybe even you, I don't know. She's sick now." Adrian's throat went dry. That name, Grace Morgan, had haunted the back corridors of his memory for years. His former housekeeper, accused of theft, fired without trial. He took a step closer. "You said your mother's sick." Lena nodded. "She can't move much. I'm trying to buy medicine. I'll work for food, or anything." The guard standing nearby snorted. "Sir, she's lying. Could be a setup." Lena's voice cracked. "I'm not lying." Adrian raised a hand to silence them both. "Enough." He studied her face again, the curve of her nose, the brown of her eyes. There was something achingly familiar there. "Wait here," he said finally. He disappeared into his study and pulled open an old personnel file from years ago. There, on a faded photograph, was a smiling woman in a housekeeping uniform, Grace Morgan. In her arms, a baby. The child's eyes, wide and bright, were unmistakable. Adrian set the photo down, the weight of realization pressing on his chest. Back in the hall, Lena stood by the fountain, tracing the edges of her bracelet with trembling fingers. The letters GM glinted faintly in the light. She whispered to herself, "Please let this work." When Adrian returned, his tone had changed. Softer, though guarded. "You said your mother's name is Grace Morgan," he said slowly. "Do you know where she worked before?" Lena frowned, thinking. A big house on a hill. She never liked talking about it. Just said it ended badly. He exhaled, guilt stirring under his ribs. "Can I see her?" he asked. Her eyes widened. "Why? I might have known her once." Lena hesitated, then nodded. "If you really mean that, she's at the shelter on Brook Street." The silence stretched between them. Then Adrian said quietly, "You're not in trouble anymore. But next time you're hungry, you ask." Tears welled in Lena's eyes. "You mean I can stay?" He looked away. "Just for a few hours. I'll have my driver take you home later." As she nodded, gratitude breaking through fear, Adrian caught a reflection in the window, the garden behind them, sunlight spilling across rows of green life. It looked different now. Alive, somehow. Later that day, Adrian stood by his car outside the shelter as Lena ran inside calling, "Mom! Mom!" Moments later, a woman appeared in the doorway, pale, frail, but unmistakable. Her eyes met Adrian's, and both froze. The years between them collapsed into silence. "Mr. Cole?" Grace whispered. He swallowed hard. "Grace. I thought you were gone." Lena looked between them, confused. "You two know each other?" Neither answered. The sound of wind filled the gap, carrying the weight of all the years lost to a single misunderstanding. Fate doesn't knock politely. It kicks the door open and drags the truth into the light. And sometimes, the people we judge the harshest, are the very ones sent to heal what we broke. The camera lingers on the scene, the billionaire standing beside his car, the little girl holding her mother's hand, the past catching up with them all. He thought he was the one offering help. But soon, he'd learn who was really saving whom. The shelter's interior smelled faintly of soap and old blankets. Sunlight leaked through cracked windows, casting gentle bars of gold across the floor. Grace sat upright on her cot, one thin blanket around her shoulders. When she saw Adrian Cole standing in the doorway, she blinked twice, unsure if her mind was playing tricks. "Mr. Cole," she whispered. What are you doing here?" Adrian hesitated, suddenly unsure of the words that used to come so easily in boardrooms. Your daughter came to my estate. She mentioned your name. I had to see for myself." Grace's gaze shifted to Lena, who stood beside him, fingers knotted in her sleeve. "Lena, you went there?" "I was trying to help," Lena said softly. "You needed medicine." Adrian stepped forward. "She's not in trouble. I should be the one apologizing." Grace frowned, confused. "Apologizing? For what?" He took a slow breath. "Years ago, you worked in my household. There was an accusation. A piece of jewelry went missing. I believed the wrong people." The room seemed to hold its breath. Grace's eyes darkened with memory. "I remember. You didn't even ask me if it was true." Adrian nodded, shame heavy in his voice. "No. I didn't. I was so concerned about my reputation that I forgot my humanity." Lena looked between them, eyes wide. "Mom, you never told me." Grace sighed. "You were just a baby. I thought if I kept moving, we'd be safe somewhere." Adrian stepped closer. "I found the old records this morning. You were innocent. The real thief was one of my managers, Vivian Holt. She sold the necklace and blamed you." Grace covered her mouth, tears rising. "All these years. I should have come sooner," Adrian said quietly. "I can't undo what I did, but I can try to make it right now." Lena's small hand slipped into her mother's. "See, Mom. I told you people still care." Grace smiled through tears. "I didn't think he'd ever remember us." Adrian knelt beside them. "Your daughter reminded me of what I forgot, that wealth without compassion is just emptiness wearing a suit." For a while, they said nothing. Only the soft hum of the shelter's heater filled the silence. Then Grace spoke again. "You built that beautiful garden. You could have thrown her out last night. I almost did, Adrian admitted. But she looked at me the same way you did the day I fired you, hurt, but not angry. Just disappointed. I couldn't face that twice. Grace reached for Lena's hand. Maybe the universe gave you a second chance. Adrian nodded slowly. If you'll let me, I'd like to take you both somewhere better. At least until you recover. Grace hesitated. Pride flickered in her tired eyes. We don't need pity, Mr. Cole. It isn't pity, he said. It's responsibility. Lena tugged at her mother's sleeve. Please, Mom. It's warm there. You could rest. Grace studied him a long moment, then finally whispered, all right. That afternoon, Adrian's car rolled through the city, the same streets that had once been invisible to him. He noticed things he'd never looked at before, a boy selling flowers in the cold, an old woman warming her hands over a trash can fire. Inside the car, Lena leaned against her mother, clutching the bracelet on her wrist. Adrian glanced at her through the rearview mirror. That bracelet, you've had it a long time. Mom gave it to me when I turned 7, she said. She said it came from someone kind. Grace smiled faintly. It was my first year working for you. Your wife gave it to me for Christmas. Adrian's breath caught. Emma. She told me I reminded her of hope, Grace said quietly. I kept it even after I lost everything. For the first time in years, Adrian's voice softened when he spoke his late wife's name. She would have liked you to keep it. When they reached the estate, the same guards who had once cornered Lena now opened the car doors carefully, eyes lowered. Lena hesitated on the marble steps, her reflection rippling in the glass doors. Adrian offered a hand. It's just a house, Lena. The people inside decide if it's cold or warm. She placed her small hand in his. Inside, Grace sank onto a couch, overwhelmed by the sight of polished wood and soft light. Adrian turned to his staff. Get her a doctor, and make sure she eats. When they were alone, Grace looked at him. Why are you really doing this, Mr. Cole? He paused. Because I can't keep pretending money fixes what conscience breaks. Grace studied him quietly. Then maybe you're already fixing it. Later that evening, Lena wandered into the garden. The last light of sunset washed over the leaves, the air smelling faintly of mint and soil. She knelt, touching one of the tomato plants she'd once stolen from. Adrian joined her silently. You picked from this row, he said. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to steal. He shook his head. No, Lena. You just reminded me what this garden was meant for. She looked up. What was it meant for? To feed people, he said simply. Not my pride. They stood there, side by side, one small, one tall, both framed by the same light. Truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through the quiet grace of forgiveness. In that moment, guilt bent its knee to innocence, and the man who owned everything learned the worth of a single act of mercy. The camera lingers on the garden as the sun dips low, painting the rows in gold. For the first time, warmth filled the mansion. But peace never stays long in a world that profits from division. Morning light spilled through the long windows of the Cole estate, landing softly on a breakfast table that had once seated only one. Now there were 3 chairs. Lena sat at the edge of hers, legs swinging, eyes wide as servants placed plates before her, eggs, fruit, a single golden croissant still warm from the oven. She whispered, "It smells like a dream." Her mother smiled faintly from across the table, her shoulders wrapped in a borrowed shawl. Adrian poured tea into her cup, awkward but sincere. "Doctor said you need warmth and rest," he murmured. "This house has plenty of both." Grace chuckled lightly. "You've changed, Mr. Cole." He looked down. "I had help." Lena grinned. "You mean me?" Adrian's lips curved just enough. "Mostly you. The days that followed unfolded like spring after a long frost. Grace's color returned little by little. She spent mornings reading by the window. Afternoons, she helped Lena with lessons from the estate's library. Lena, meanwhile, was everywhere, talking to gardeners, asking endless questions, trailing Adrian like a curious sparrow. "Why do you keep all these flowers if no one ever visits?" she asked one afternoon, standing beside him among rows of roses. He hesitated. "Maybe I was waiting for someone to notice them." Lena smiled. "Well, I noticed them first." He glanced down at her, barefoot in the grass, hair full of sunlight, and realized he hadn't heard laughter in this garden since his wife died. That evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Adrian found himself telling stories he hadn't shared in years. He spoke about Emma, his late wife, how she believed every good thing in life began with soil and patience. How she planted the first seed in this very garden. Lena listened, chin resting on her knees. "She sounds kind," she said softly. "She was," he answered. "You remind me of her." Grace, listening from the porch, smiled quietly. "Then maybe Emma sent us your way." Adrian looked at her, the old guilt still flickering behind his eyes. "If that's true, she has a sense of humor." Days blurred into a rhythm of small miracles. Adrian taught Lena how to prune vines without hurting them. She taught him how to laugh at himself when he got dirt on his shoes. They argued playfully about what vegetables were best. Lena voted for tomatoes, Adrian for basil. In the evenings, they sat together under the string lights that lined the garden path, sharing tea and stories. Grace would hum an old tune, and Lena would join in halfway through, off-key but full of life. One night, as fireflies flickered like floating stars, Lena looked up at Adrian and asked, "Do you think people can start over?" He thought for a moment. "Only if they stop running from the part of themselves they don't like." "Then you did it," she said. "You started over." He looked at her, surprised. "What makes you say that?" "Because you smile now," she said simply. Lena and Adrian plant new seedlings together. Grace teaches the staff an old family recipe, filling the kitchen with laughter. Adrian installs a swing for Lena under the oak tree. A newspaper headline flashes on screen, "Reclusive Billionaire launches community garden program." The garden, once sterile and silent, now bursts with color and sound, people from nearby shelters helping, children visiting on weekends. The mansion no longer feels like a fortress. It feels alive. One afternoon, Adrian came home early from the office to find Lena drawing at the kitchen counter. "What's that?" he asked, peering over her shoulder. She turned the sketch pad toward him. It was a picture of the three of them standing in the garden, Grace holding flowers, Adrian holding a watering can, Lena in the middle with her arms out. Above them, in block letters, she'd written, "Our home." He blinked hard, clearing his throat. "You're getting good at this." She grinned. "You think so?" "I know so." He tapped the page. "But next time, draw the fountain too. It deserves some credit." She giggled. "You mean the one I almost fell into?" "Exactly that one." Later that week, Grace joined Adrian on the veranda. The air smelled of rain. "You've given her something I couldn't," she said quietly. He frowned. "What's that?" "A childhood that doesn't hurt." He looked out over the garden, watching Lena chase butterflies through the tall grass. "Maybe she gave that to me first." Grace smiled. "Then you're even." They sat in companionable silence until thunder rolled in the distance. Grace turned to him. "You've done more than you owe, Adrian." He shook his head. "Debt doesn't end with money, Grace. It ends with peace." Rain pattered against the windows. Lena wandered into the music room, curiosity glowing in her eyes. "Wow," she whispered, running her fingers across the keys of a grand piano covered in dust. Adrian entered behind her. "Hasn't been played in years. Do you know how?" He hesitated, then sat down. The first notes were shaky, but soon a melody filled the room, a tune half forgotten, gentle and sad. Grace appeared in the doorway, smiling through tears. Emma used to play that. Adrian nodded. She did. I almost forgot how it sounded. Lena climbed onto the bench beside him. Teach me. He looked down at her tiny hands, then moved his fingers slowly, guiding hers over the keys. Together, they found a rhythm. The camera drifts outward, 3 figures framed by warm light, music threading through the rain. Forgiveness doesn't shout, it hums quietly through the rooms we thought were empty. And sometimes, family isn't found by blood, but by the hearts that refuse to stay closed. For a few precious days, the world outside seemed far away. No boardrooms. No reporters. No fences. Just laughter echoing through halls once filled with silence. But peace has enemies, the kind that wear smiles in daylight. And while the garden bloomed, someone else was already plotting to tear it down. The following week began with sunshine and ended with headlines. A drone photo of the Cole Estates garden, Adrian working beside Grace and Lena, hit the front page of a gossip site under the caption. Billionaire shelters former employee accused of theft, PR move or midlife crisis. By noon, his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Board members demanded explanations. Reporters camped outside the gate. Even the charity partners he'd funded for years began to distance themselves politely. Clara, his assistant, entered the office holding her tablet. Sir, the press wants a statement. They're asking if you've adopted them. Adrian exhaled slowly. Since when did kindness need a press release? Since the world stopped believing in it, Clara replied. At home, Grace folded the morning paper and sighed. You should have known they'd twist it. I don't care about them, Adrian said. You should, she answered gently. You built that world. It listens when you speak. He sat beside her. Then maybe it's time I said something worth hearing. Meanwhile, Vivian Holt, the former manager who had once framed Grace, watched the same news segment from a sleek office across town. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. So the great Adrian Cole found his conscience, she muttered. Pity it'll cost him. She typed an email, attaching an old falsified record that still listed Grace as terminated for theft. A journalist friend owed her a favor. By evening, another headline hit the airwaves. Grace Morgan back at Cole Estate, unresolved investigation resurfaces. The story exploded. Talk shows debated it, shareholders panicked. Adrian's legal advisor called. If you keep them there, you risk your position. Step back until it blows over. He hung up without replying. That night, the garden was quiet. Rain tapped against the greenhouse glass. Grace stood among the rows, staring at the plants she'd helped bring back to life. You shouldn't have to pay for my past, she whispered when Adrian joined her. He shook his head. Your past was stolen. I'm the one paying it back. She met his gaze. And if you lose everything? Then I'll finally understand what you felt when I took everything from you. They stood in silence, rain blurring the lights outside. Across the hall, Lena sat on the staircase clutching her drawing pad. She could hear muffled voices, adult tension heavy in the air. When Adrian passed by later, she asked, did we do something bad? He knelt beside her. No, Lena. Sometimes doing the right thing just looks wrong to people who don't understand it. She tilted her head. Then we just keep doing it until they do. He smiled faintly. Exactly. The next day brought more trouble. Sponsors withdrew funding from his Green Future initiative. An investor threatened a lawsuit over reputational damage. Clara whispered, Sir, the board's calling an emergency vote. They want you to step down. Adrian looked out the window toward the garden, Grace and Lena tending seedlings despite the drizzle. Tell them I'll attend, he said. A dozen suits sat around the table, eyes sharp with judgment. Adrian, one began, you've turned a charity project into a scandal. The footage of you with that woman. She has a name, he interrupted. Grace Morgan. Has made investors nervous. We suggest a temporary resignation until this resolves. He folded his hands. And if I refuse? Then the company removes you. He stood, calm. Then remove me. But understand this, what we plant matters more than what we sell. I built this company to grow life, not fear. The room fell silent. He walked out before anyone could answer. When he returned home that evening, the gate was surrounded by reporters shouting questions. Lena waited by the door. You look tired, she said. He knelt, managing a smile. I'm all right. Grace appeared behind her. What did they decide? He shrugged. I decided first. You left it all. He nodded. Turns out, freedom's cheaper than I thought. Grace exhaled, equal parts worry and admiration. You really are your wife's husband. That night, the estate felt different, quiet but alive. Without the hum of constant calls or meetings, the house seemed to breathe again. Adrian stood on the balcony, phone buzzing with unanswered messages. He turned it off, slipped it into his pocket, and watched Lena chasing lightning bugs across the lawn. For a fleeting moment, he felt peace. Then headlights cut across the driveway. A black car stopped, and Vivian stepped out, umbrella in hand. Impressive, she said, approaching. You gave up millions for sentiment. Adrian's expression hardened. You came all this way to gloat. She handed him an envelope. Consider it a friendly reminder that some stories don't stay buried. That file still says Grace Morgan stole from you. One call from me, and every outlet in the city will print it. He opened the envelope, scanning the copied report. You forged this. She smiled thinly. Prove it. Lena had appeared on the porch, watching. Grace followed, voice calm but firm. You've already taken enough, Vivian. Leave us. Vivian turned, smirking. You think he'll risk more for you? We'll see. She walked away, heels clicking against wet stone. Adrian crumpled the paper in his fist. Not this time, he murmured. Grace touched his arm. Let the truth speak, Adrian. It's waited long enough. He met her eyes, and something in him settled. Then tomorrow, it speaks to everyone. Peace tests conviction more than war ever could. And the louder the world shouted its doubts, the clearer his choice became. That night, Adrian sat at his desk, pulling up the old security archives, the files he'd ignored years ago. Hours passed until, finally, one grainy video froze his hand. Vivian. Slipping a velvet box into her purse. Timestamped the same day Grace was fired. He exhaled, relief and fury mixing in equal measure. Outside, the first light of dawn brushed the garden leaves. Lena stepped onto the porch and saw him through the window, head bowed over the glowing screen, truth finally in his grasp. She smiled to herself. Told you we just keep doing it until they understand. By morning, the world would hear the truth. But every truth comes with a price. Morning broke clean and cold. Reporters clustered outside City Hall, their cameras glinting like frost. At the center of the steps, a podium waited beneath a banner, Cole Foundation Press Conference. Adrian Cole adjusted the microphone with steady hands. Behind him stood Grace and Lena, one woman reclaimed, one child unafraid. The murmurs swelled as he began to speak. For years, I told myself I built my life on integrity. I was wrong. I built it on silence. The crowd stilled. Years ago, I accused an employee, Grace Morgan, of theft. I never questioned the evidence, because it was easier to believe a lie that protected my name. That choice destroyed 2 lives and darkened mine. Gasps rippled through the audience. Grace's fingers tightened around Lena's. Adrian raised a folder. Last night, I found the truth, footage proving another person framed her. He nodded to Clara, who tapped a laptop. The screen behind them flickered to life. Vivian Holt, caught on grainy video sliding a velvet box into her bag, timestamp flashing in the corner. The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. Adrian waited until the noise fell. This is what greed looks like when it wears a suit. But this, he gestured toward Grace and Lena, is what courage looks like when it refuses to disappear. Grace blinked back tears. I've resigned from my board positions, he continued. The wealth I built from other people's labor will now build something different, food programs, shelters, and education for children like Lena. Because justice isn't finished until generosity begins. The audience hushed again. Across town, Vivian watched the live broadcast from her office. When the footage ended, security entered with an investigator. She didn't fight, she simply closed her laptop and whispered, "He finally looked." Back at City Hall, the conference dissolved into applause. Grace turned to Adrian, voice trembling. "You didn't have to do this publicly." He smiled faintly. "I owed you truth where everyone could hear it." Lena tugged his sleeve. "Does that mean we can go home now?" He knelt. "You already are home." That evening, they returned to the estate. Reporters were gone, only the sound of wind moving through the trees remained. In the garden, the lights glowed softly over rows of green. Grace walked between them, fingertips brushing leaves like memories. "It's strange," she said quietly. "All this time, I dreamed of justice. When it finally came, it didn't feel like revenge. Just, release." Adrian nodded. "Because justice isn't about winning. It's about breathing again." Later, the 3 of them sat on the porch steps, the sky streaked with pink and gold. Lena rested her head on Grace's shoulder. "Mom, are we rich now?" Grace laughed softly. "Not the kind that counts money." Adrian added, "The kind that counts people." Lena smiled, satisfied with the answer. Workers install a new sign at the garden gate, "Grace's Table, free TO all." Volunteers from shelters plant seedlings alongside corporate employees. Adrian hands over foundation papers to community leaders. Grace speaks quietly to a group of women starting over, "You are more than your mistakes, or anyone else's." Lena runs through the garden laughing, clutching a basket of tomatoes. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation, now hums with voices and purpose. That night, Adrian walked the rows alone, moonlight on his face. He stopped where Lena had once knelt, stealing food in desperation. A new plaque stood there. "From hunger grew hope." He smiled, a sound somewhere between pride and humility escaping his throat. Grace joined him, holding 2 cups of tea. "You could have hidden, Adrian." "I've hidden long enough," he said. "Truth doesn't ruin a man. Pretending does." She handed him the cup. "Then here's to pretending no more." They clinked the porcelain gently. When truth finally speaks, it doesn't shout. It stands quietly in the sunlight and waits for hearts brave enough to face it. That morning, a man who owned everything gave up power and found peace instead. And a woman once called a thief reclaimed the one thing worth more than gold, her name. As night settled, Lena placed a single tomato on the porch railing, the way some people leave candles in churches. "Why that one?" Adrian asked. She grinned. "Because it's the first one I ever took." Grace smiled. "Then it belongs here." A reminder of how far a seed can travel. They watched the moonlight paint silver across the garden. The world had heard the truth. But the story wasn't about headlines anymore. It was about what would bloom next. Spring arrived like a slow exhale. The frost that once crusted the Cole estate melted into soft earth, and every path in the garden sprouted color. Children from the nearby shelters ran between the rows, their laughter rising above the hum of bees. Volunteers clipped herbs and packed baskets for delivery trucks bearing the emblem, Grace's Table, free to all. At the center of it all, a little girl in a blue dress crouched to water a line of tomato plants. Lena looked up when she heard footsteps on the gravel. Adrian and Grace approached side by side, sunlight glinting on the watering can in his hand. "Careful with those roots," he teased. She grinned. "You say that every time." "That's because you keep overwatering them." Grace laughed softly. "And yet they keep growing. Maybe they like too much care." Inside the converted greenhouse, tables gleamed under skylights. The first meals of the day steamed in large pots, prepared by a mix of chefs and residents. Grace ladled soup into bowls, handing them to a line of guests. Some she knew by name now, others left with grateful smiles. A reporter approached timidly. "Mrs. Morgan, people say this place has changed the city." "What changed you?" Grace wiped her hands on her apron, glancing through the window toward Adrian and Lena planting outside. "Forgiveness," she said. "It's lighter to carry than resentment." Adrian's old executive office had become a classroom. Charts of crops and soil cycles replaced stock graphs. He knelt beside a whiteboard where Lena and a few other children were learning about composting. "Everything that dies feeds something else," he explained. "Nothing is wasted if we use it well." Lena raised her hand. "Even mistakes?" He smiled. "Especially mistakes." The class laughed, but the truth settled quietly among them like sunlight through glass. That evening, the three of them sat on the porch steps as dusk turned the sky violet. Lena leaned against Grace, clutching a small leather notebook. "I'm writing a story," she said. "About us." Grace brushed a curl from her daughter's face. "What's it called?" Lena flipped the cover to show her neat handwriting, "The Garden That Fed Everyone." Adrian chuckled. "That's better than any headline I've ever had." As the moon rose, the garden lights blinked on, strings of warm bulbs stretching over the paths like constellations. Grace walked to the fountain and set a single tomato in its basin, the same kind Lena once stole. Adrian asked softly, "Still keeping traditions?" She nodded. A reminder that hunger started this, but hope kept it alive. He looked at her, voice low. "And love finished it." They stood there as the water rippled around the bright fruit, its reflection glowing like a small red sun. In the beginning, a little girl crossed a wall for food. In the end, she grew enough to feed a city. Wealth built on fear crumbles. Wealth built on mercy multiplies. Grace found justice. Adrian found peace. And Lena, the girl once called a thief, became the gardener who taught them both what it means to give. The camera rises slowly over the estate, gardens stretching toward the horizon, people working side by side, laughter carrying on the wind. Adrian places a sign near the gate engraved with Emma Cole's favorite quote. "The smallest seed of kindness can split the hardest stone." Lena traces the letters with her finger. "It's true," she says. Grace smiles. "You proved it." They walk back toward the house as the lights dim, three silhouettes framed by a sky full of stars. Before judging a story, ask who's hungry in it. Sometimes, the person you call a thief is only trying to survive. And sometimes, mercy isn't charity, it's justice with a heartbeat.